We welcome in our old friend, Mr. Jay Ruston. I'm going to give him a proper introduction here and just list some. If I listed all the credits, it would take up the entire segment, so I can't do that. But I'm going to list some of them. So he's either produced, engineered, or mixed all of these following bands: Stone Sour, Avatar, Meatloaf, Corey Taylor, The Donnas, Armored Saint, Steel Panther, Pearl, Brian Posehn, Anthrax, Motor Sister, Uriah Heep, Black Star Riders, Amon Amarth, Coheed and Cambria. We'll just go on and on and on. And there's a million more. It's insane. Anyway,
You
he
forgot
knows what
Diana Ross.
he knows what he knows what. In other words, he knows what he's doing. So that's why we have him on here.
Well, thank
Talking
you
about
so much, Brian.
no problem, man. Thank you. Talking Danzig, Twist of Cain, first record that he did for Ruben's label. I believe it was the first record that came out on Deaf American, actually. It was. I believe Martin Popoff mentioned that. And so produced it, obviously. And what are your thoughts on the production?
I actually love the production. Obviously growing up near Detroit, Mother was a radio staple, like a weird live version, but the studio version is great. Um, but to me, the secret star of the first Danzig record is David Bianco, the engineer. And he had a studio here in LA called Dave's Room, which still exists. And sadly, he passed away. But Paul Fig runs Dave's Room now, and it's a fantastic, very old school studio deep in the valley. And I think Neil Young recorded there in like 1971 or something. And it's a very old, vintage kind of retro place. And you know, Dave made it amazing with some cool vintage gear and stuff. And he's just like was one of the most wicked engineers on the planet, which Rick Rubin always managed to find those guys. He needs somebody to do all the heavy lifting, obviously, because he's not an engineer. And he always had killer engineers. So to me, David's like the unsung hero of this record. It sounds incredible. I actually, it's super dry, which I normally hate, and I love that about it. Like the drums are punchy. I love Chuck Biscuit's drum sound. I love the guitar sound. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, it was. I have to admit, and I'm probably getting a lot of trouble for this, but I wasn't the biggest Misfits or Sam Hain fan. Respect to both of them, of course. I like the Misfits probably more than Sam Hain. So when this record came out, I wasn't really sure what it was going to be. And it was obviously Ruben's first rock thing that he was doing, because before that, famously, is with Def Jam, of course. But it's really good, and I'm with you. I like dry production in general if it's done well. And that's clearly the one thing. If you look at all the Ruben produced records, they're all kind of have that. But like you mentioned, his genius to me as a producer, not necessarily, because you hear varying reports about how he did or did not work with the band, but he always finds phenomenal engineers. And we've talked to so many of them on the show, whether it's Dave Schiffman, or we just had Greg Fiddleman on recently talking about Metallica. And yeah, he just finds these engineers that are just phenomenal engineers, and he keeps finding more and more of them. I'll go, okay, one guy's done, then the next guy comes in, and clearly smart for him, because it makes him look good, because it's like, oh, he produced it. But the sound, if you listen to whether it's Danzig or Slayer, or even the early Metallica stuff he did with them, like Death Magnetic, it does have that same sort of dry overall sound to it. But like I said, I kind of like that. But for me, the dryness is more really in the drums.
Yeah. And I'm with you, like Misfits, Sam Hain. It was not my thing growing up. It was, Iron Maiden, Metallica, then eventually, which led to Pantera, Soundgarden, things like that. And I would always get a lot of ribbing when I was working with like the Stone Sour guys or some of the other bands that were really into like this early 80s, like whether it's punk or hardcore or whatever style you want to call the Misfits. It it just what if it sounded bad, I couldn't get into it. Like the production had to be there for me. And I know that's silly, but it's just which is why I didn't get into a lot of like the Scandinavian metal in the early days, because I'm like, this just all sounds terrible. And I was really into production at a very young age, and records had to sound great for me. And for me, this was the first time that something Glenn Danzig was involved with sounded good. And I think Rubin recognized that was, being more commercially acceptable was going to make him a star, and it most certainly did.
Yeah, and by the way, if you're watching the video part of this, Jay's studio's not on fire. He just has some weird light behind him
I've
blinking
got a
the whole
strobe happening.
Yeah, there you go. So production value, folks, production value.
Yeah.
Yeah, that well, like you mentioned, he kind of obviously was a huge record for Danzig and huge for Rubin as well as being his first release. And the two big songs on there, like you mentioned earlier, Mother and this one, Twist of Cain. And I mean, I like both of them a lot. They're both you listen to it once and it gets in your head for about a week or so. But I've always just loved this song. So when Curtis picked, who do you want to? I knew he was going to do some sort of Danzig or Misfits thing because he's completely into all that stuff. But when he chose this song, I was like, oh, I'm so happy because I said Mother or Twist of Cain, and he said Twist of Cain. Like, I'm really happy he picked this because I think the song's a little bit more interesting. There's more dynamics to it, and production wise too, it kind of has. I mean, there's not a lot going on. Obviously, it's just the sound is what the sound is, but the way the guitars are played and how the guitars sound, I just always thought sounded really cool.
Well, and I agree with you. And it's interesting, like the riff of this song, I hadn't heard it in a while. When I played it last week, I was like, oh, this riff has been ripped off many times.
Yep.
And also, they borrowed it. You can go back to the 70s and find many examples of a variation of this riff. But the way they do it, it sounds darker and scarier somehow. I don't know why. But I love the guitar sound. To me, everything about this record sounds like a couple Marshalls, an Ampeg, and a good drum kit in a room. That's what this record sounds like to me, and that's what it should sound like, and I think that's why it works so well.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it has that. It has that to me a little bit. It has that kind of '70s feel to it, which of course
Yeah.
I've said a million times on the show. I grew up in the '70s. And I just love the way everything sounded because it was real sounds and it wasn't, nothing was doctored or manufactured or there's no, anything going on. I mean, this was, probably still kind of in that era where there wasn't as much of that going on. But I just love the. It sounds like a band playing, which is cool.
Yes. I would totally agree, and it I mean, the second record doesn't get as much love, and probably the songs aren't as good, but what a debut. And I don't think people appreciate the sound of it as much because what was happening at that time was this like 88?
This was '88. Yep.
Everything was so wet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, even Appetite for Destruction, which came out around this time, maybe like a year later, um, is the snare drum's got a massive reverb on
Yep.
it, and the vocals are super wet, and it still works. So it's funny how like there was this crossover of okay, the '90s are coming. There's a few bands that have the balls to do this, and it's one of the few. This is one of the few records I will applaud Rick Rubin on. It's not that I dislike him. A lot of his records to me are too dry and too crunchy. And I love the Tom Petty Wildflowers record. I think it's genius. I really do like the first Chili Peppers record he did, Blood Sugar. I think it's great. But again, he actually used a little reverb on that record. There's like ambience. Although I think Brendan O'Brien, who engineered that, said they used the reverb in the house,
A
like
room,
while
yeah, room,
recording it.
yeah, room
But
sound.
either
Sure.
way, you could hear it. There is no room mic on this Danzig record. Like it is
No,
so dry. And I'm wondering now. I think they recorded this in New York. At first, I thought, oh,
they did.
maybe yeah, I thought maybe because David Bianco's studio is super dry and dead. It's like very 70s. So I thought, oh, maybe they did it at Dave's room. But no, they did it in the East Coast. So clearly they, found a room that was nice and dead and matched
Yeah,
the
it
sound
was
like an.
Atlantic Recording Studios and Chung King Metal, both in New
Oh,
York.
Chung King. Okay, yeah, that was a legendary place, which sadly is gone. But
Yeah.
yeah, lots and lots of records recorded there. I think Keith Forsey told me they did some of the Billy Idol stuff at Chung King.
Yeah, yeah. There's a million things that was basically there, like Ladyland and a couple other places in New York that like all the rock and metal people did. But I do want to give a little bit of love to John Christ, the guitar player, who's just
Hmm.
so good and clearly came up with a lot of good stuff. But I've always loved, and again I mentioned earlier, the guitar tone on this record. I always loved his guitar tone. It just sounded, it's one of those thick, heavy. It's not thin. It's not too thick. It's not too heavy. It just kind of has that right little pocket sound to it, especially for the type of music that Danzig was doing at that time.
To me, it sounds like a Marshall with maybe like a tube screamer in front of it or something, because
Yep.
it's just a little more gain and a little more balls than a Marshall would normally have. I could be totally wrong. It might be a Mesa Boogie like Metallica was using at that time, the classic Mark III head everybody was using in the 80s. Could have been one of those, but
It
you know,
to me, it doesn't sound like that. I tend to agree with you. I think Marshall amp for sure, and it just has that feel to it. And I just for me personally, the best rhythm guitar sound you can have in the studio, in my personal opinion, is Gibson Flying V through a Marshall amp with a 100-watt head. It just
oh, okay. I mean,
the
you're that's like the Scott Ian tone with the TC boost. That was the first like
yeah.
three records.
Well, that's we did those Trouble records, and that's what they were doing. They were tuned down, obviously, too. But I just those guitar tones on that, and we spent, we were in the studio for like 10 days for the first record, and maybe 2 weeks for the second one. Not spending a
Wow.
lot of money on it, but that guitar tone, man, still to this day, I listen to those records, going, man, it's just so heavy, and it sounds just so good. Basically, because it just sounded good anyway. So you just put a mic to it, and you're done.
It's hard to screw that up, and people manage to do it, but that is a deadly combination. And I just recorded that exact combination very recently, and still sounds good. And I remember my buddy Jacob came in the studio and he was like, "What is that guitar sound?" I said, "It's a Flying V into a Marshall." Wow. Like, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, it's so good. I've always loved it. And a Gibson. I mean, I'm for rhythm guitars. I'm very pro Gibson. I think any Gibson guitar, Les Pauls sound great too with
100%.
rhythms. I never really liked the
100%.
the and some people can do it okay, but the Fenders, Fenders as a lead guitar is great. That's what a lot of people use them for. But for rhythms, sometimes it doesn't have that thickness that I like that the Gibsons do.
There's something about a Les Paul and a Flying V, of course. There's something about their rhythm sound that's just thick, and especially into a Marshall, because if you plug a Strat into a Marshall, it does sound great, but it's a very like more sizzle to the sound. And it always blew my mind that like guys like Slash could have so much sizzle on their sound because he's playing a Les Paul or like Izzy Stradlin. It's really interesting. I was always curious of how they had their Marshall set, but this clearly sounds like a V or a Les Paul
Yeah,
into
I
an
think
old
I'm
Marshall.
pretty sure he's playing a Les Paul, but I could be wrong. And I mean, you can put an Ace Frehley in there too, as far as he had
Yeah,
such a great
exactly.
tone. I mean, the first record's not so much, but once you get to Kiss Alive, I mean, man, those
Yes,
guitars, and it's even on the early stuff, like his lead tone was just so incredible.
100%. And I'm curious, like what this guitar sound, it could be a Plexi or a JMP, like where they were just having to crank the amp to get the distortion rather than having a preamp like a JCM 800. So that's also could be that with like a boost pedal. I don't know if that information would be impossible to find, but I'm quite curious because it is a phenomenal guitar sound.
Yeah, I always wish that like Wikipedia or something would have list like kind of what I'm sure there's somebody can tell me. I'm sure there are some places out there where you can look up like the production and what instruments and amps and things that these guys played back in the day. But
You
I
can
think
dig up a lot of that stuff, like, and Tony Platt, who engineered Back in Black and I think Highway to Hell, he did a really great interview where he basically said there wasn't an SM57 in sight on those AC/DC records. It was all Neumann tube mics
yeah.
and Neumann large diaphragms, which blew my mind. Like the guitar sound was like a freaking tube mic on Angus and Malcolm's amps, and the drums too. Like I think he said there was a 57 on the snare. That was it. Everything else was all big fat Neumanns.
Yeah, well, we're gonna get to it at some point, probably certainly more than one song. But when we get to Kiss Alive, I want to get my old friend Eddie Kramer on to talk about that because he's amazing. Like I forget when we first met him at Metal Blade, but he came in a few times and he just sit in my office and I'd ask him a million stupid Kiss questions about
Yeah,
all those records, and he would just tell stories. And like I think once we were talking for like 2 or 3 hours or something, just about that, not anything else. And he was awesome. He's always
that's
good.
great. Yeah, Kiss Alive, I'm sure he has killers because he
Oh yeah.
recorded and mixed it, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. That was the first one that he did the whole record basically. So now,
Kilbo
but
Hall.
yeah, and I quiz him about everything else, Rock and Roll Over and Love Gun and all that stuff. But we'll get there at another time. Well, Jay, as always, thanks so much for doing this. I'm sure we will see you again shortly.
My pleasure, Brian. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks, man. Hey,